Welcome back, America. This book by Peggy Noonan, A Certain Idea of America, has been the source of domestic conflict because I've been taking it back from the Fetching Mrs. Hewitt all week, and then she takes it back from me because she loves Peggy Noonan's writing so much. Peggy Noonan joins me now. Good morning, Peggy. Congratulations on A Certain Idea of America. But it is a source of domestic division inside the Hewitt household.
Well, rarely am I so happy to hear I'm being a source of domestic division. Hello, Hugh, and hi to Mrs. Hewitt, and thank you for having me on.
Well, she wants me, and I will get to it. She wants me to particularly talk about your essay on George H.W. Bush, her favorite president, and we will get there. But I want to begin with your essay on the friendship between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, because it is the most important essay for this moment. I don't know if you've lost any friends over the last 8 years. I have. Got ghosted by people because I support Donald Trump, and they just ghosted me, and that's fine. Maybe they'll come back. Everyone needs a Benjamin Rush. It's a beautiful essay. Will you tell people about it?
Yeah, Hugh, what you say is true on both sides. I've been ghosted also for being oppositional towards Donald Trump. So it's happened a lot. There's been a great winnowing out here. And there you are. The story of John Adams and Thomas Jefferson is one of reconciliation. They had been the greatest of friends early on in the 1770s when they were inventing America and its meaning and its way of operating and its reason for coming on the world. Greatest of friends. Greatest of friends when they were both U.S. envoys in Europe as America became a beginning nation. Had some political differences, but really broke over the French Revolution, which John Adams quickly apprehended would end in terror, and which Thomas Jefferson decided was just the full flowering of the spirit of 1776, and he wasn't too worried about the violence. They broke. They broke for many years, and yet they had loved each other, and they had been geniuses together. And they had a mutual friend, Benjamin Rush, another signer of the Constitution, who knew that both men were wounded by the end of their friendship. And subtly over the years, he dropped hints to both. To Jefferson, Adams was talking about you. He loves you so much. To Adams, oh my God, Jefferson misses you. Finally, there were some slight outreaches and then the beginning of an onrush of letters between Jefferson and Adams that lasted more than 10 years and in which they poured out their hearts, or at least Adams did. Adams was a man who wanted so much. He was like a laser beam going towards the truth. Jefferson was a little more roundabout, not so interested in laying bare his heart. He changed the subject when the French Revolution came up in Adams's letters. Anyway, by the end, they had achieved their old friendship again. It was a balm to John Adams' heart. Famously, both of them, each of them died on the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson at his home in Virginia. I was going to say Monticello. I wonder if I got that right.
It is Monticello. Yep.
Yeah, it is Monticello. Sorry, I was getting Madison's thing there confused. Anyway, Jefferson quietly in the night at Monticello, Adams at home, and I think Braintree in Massachusetts. And Adams is, according to lore, his last words were on the 50th anniversary of the signing, well, at least Jefferson still survives. But they both had
We are
held
coming
out
up
to die on that
to the
great
two.
day.
Isn't that marvelous? And it's 50 years after the Declaration. We're coming up on the 250th. And the celebration
Yes.
ought to actually begin this year in April in Lexington and Concord. But by the
Yeah.
250th, do you think any Rushes will be able to work on any of these breakages, or are they going to continue until and unless Donald Trump is retired and off of the scene?
I would like to think the human heart would be quicker and more full of alacrity than the political schedule. Maybe in the next few years, the Trump folk will settle down feeling they have settled this, they won. And maybe the anti Trump folk will settle down and think politics is not worth the loss of a friend. Politics is politics, but friendship has to do with love and it supersedes. And who knows, maybe miraculous things will happen, but as I said in the column, may you have a Benjamin Rush. Everybody's trying to
Yep.
repair something.
That's a exact quote. We're all trying to repair something. May you have a Benjamin Rush. That's in A Certain Idea of America. I'm going to continue talking with Peggy Noonan about her brand new book, and it's a wonderful Christmas present. I can prove it to you because I've been wrestling over the copy that we got in advance with the Fetching Mrs. Hewitt. Don't go anywhere, America. I've got lots to talk to Peggy about. We'll put it on YouTube, play it in the morning. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Thanks for listening today. I am back now with Peggy Noonan, whose brand new book, A Certain Idea of America, is going to be a bestseller. It's just so fabulous. Peggy, I'm going to do the big three from my wife. She wanted me to talk to you about Billy Graham. And so I read that one very carefully. Turns out we have a common friend in Archbishop Hugh. And Billy Graham was a man who wanted to save your soul, whoever you are, in whatever circumstances. And I love the quote the Archbishop gave you. He spoke the same kind of mere Christianity that C.S. Lewis did so well, but with an American accent. Did you ever meet Billy Graham? I got to meet him twice at both Nixon funerals, but how about you?
I never met him. I watched him from the time I was a child in New York in local programming on local TV. If Billy Graham had a crusade, it'd wind up on one of our 7 channels. And I remember walking by the TV set and seeing that tall, slim, high cheekboned fella speaking at a podium without notes, with only one text, and that was the Bible. And sometimes he'd turn to it and turn the pages. My family was Irish Catholic. Billy Graham seemed to me some sort of Southerner, sounded like a Southerner, and he seemed some sort of Protestant. But in the darndest way, as Archbishop Chaput pointed out, Billy Graham was in a time not of ecumenism, in, say, the early 60s and late 60s. He was an ecumenical figure. Catholics and Protestants and agnostics, they all kind of saw it. They could hear him in the same way. And his message was essential. Christ died for you to redeem you. Christ is God. Come, be a Christian. Here are the reasons why. It was simple and it was straight. And I found out later as I read about him, he exhausted himself doing his Billy Graham crusades throughout the world. It wasn't a cushy job. It sort of wasn't like now everybody's kind of richer. And religious folk too can be kind of richer and have richer structures. It was kind of Billy Graham out on his own, inventing his own thing and working himself into exhaustion so that sometimes he stood up to speak and collapsed. So, what a figure, what an American, and what a man to have lasted on the public scene for about 60 years, and no one in the end could question his sincerity, his authenticity, his love of God. And he put it all out there.
My favorite episode of The Crown. I am sure you watched The Crown.
Yeah.
I'm guessing, but I'm sure you watched The
Yes.
Crown. That's my favorite episode, when the Queen says, "Bring me this man," and he shows up.
Yes. And for once, the producers and writers on that show, I shouldn't say for once, but even they treated Graham with the dignity due him.
Now I'm get to go to my favorite one in here, which is it's not really relevant to Americans, but I thought you did Queen Elizabeth the justice that she deserved by counting among her qualities the simple graciousness with which she presided over the country. And it's a good argument for staying the course, because there were some rough patches in there, Peggy Noonan.
Rough patches in her life, do you mean?
Oh, yes.
Elizabeth's
Oh, yes.
life? Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, from the time she became queen, shockingly, a girl in her 20s, fairly newly married, with married less than 6 years, I think. She had some young children, but she and her husband, Philip, a naval officer, were really just starting out in life when suddenly her father died. Uh, she got the word. She was in Africa with her husband, and she was elevated to the throne before she or anyone else quite expected or intended. And she was equal to the moment. And boy, did she break the code on how to be a monarch, how
Tough
to be
act to
that thing.
follow. I
Oh
do
my
not envy
gosh,
Charles
yes.
or William. I do not
Yeah,
envy them.
I
Let me go to
agree.
the next one because I'm going to do one for Betsy now. History gives George H.W. Bush his due. He did not want to embarrass or provoke, and you make a good argument, Peggy. He ought to have received the Nobel Prize, he and maybe James Baker, for jointly managing the dissolution of our most dangerous enemy that our common boss, Ronald Reagan, really put to the edge of collapse. But it had to be a managed collapse. Now that we look at it, it was very dangerous.
Yes, it was dangerous, and George H.W. Bush had, he was a natural gentleman. He was a natural patrician. He was a natural diplomat. He could imagine how the other guy feels. Bush understood that Moscow at the end of the Cold War was full of people who, whether it was a terrible system or as they thought a good enough system, but they were people who'd seen their entire system to which they'd given their lives collapse. They were lost, they were humiliated. H.W. Bush, knew in his gut that a humiliated foe is a dangerous foe. So he was not there to humiliate them, to dance on them, to beat his breast and crow about the superiority of our system versus theirs, and theirs naturally fell because it was wicked and inadequate. He said very little. He just saw to the peaceful end of a great nuclear power, the Soviet Union. He encouraged the rise of democracy. Um, he encouraged a feeling of calm, and he helped in a great diplomatic feat. He and Helmut Kohl and a few others helped see to the reunification of Germany, East and West, which had been torn abruptly after 1945. And, you know, the it, it's funny, but Republicans then had such a reputation for competence in the international sphere that the world looked and thought, well, of course they did it right. America had a reputation for competence. So the world looked and said, well, the Americans are doing it correctly. What do you want? Only in retrospect could people see what a feat in the political history of man what George H.W. Bush did. Not winning the victory, but in a way, the harder task of handling the repercussions and outcomes of the victory. So it was a feat. The guy should have won a Nobel Prize. What the heck?
Let me ask you my big question that comes out of H.W., President Reagan, Richard Nixon, everyone in the greatest generation back to Eisenhower who went to war from family, frontier, farm, and factory and came back. And America was blessed by a generation that had seen such awful things, they didn't really think about themselves that much. Do you think that the long war, the 20 years of war, have produced leaders of that caliber who are now going to be taking up positions of power, not necessarily at the top yet, because Donald Trump, of course, is not of that generation, but people like Senator Cotton, Michael Waltz is the new national security advisor. The people who went and fought that war, are they of the same caliber as the people who went and fought World War II?
Well, I can't make that comparison. I can tell you that those who fought World War II did come from, I think, a healthier education system, a healthier culture, a calmer country in its way. Those who fought the long wars of the early 20th century, the first quarter of the 21st century, I beg your pardon, had to maybe struggle against the tide a little bit to be well educated, stable, and sensitive. I, I'm not sure what I'm saying here is correct, but it seems to me they're impressive men, and they didn't as much have the culture to support them. So we'll see how they do. But I'll tell you, this is something worth thought. I think World War I and World War II taught America what it is to win and be powerful. The long wars of the early 21st century taught its soldiers about some limits of power and about some limits on what you can do and not do, and tempered them, I suspect, with regard to many things. They are not a triumphant generation so far, but a tempered generation, I would think. And we'll see how that
Yep.
works out.
My last question, Peggy Noonan, I don't want to abuse your time. I want to know, you and Joseph Epstein are the two people, if I see your byline, I read everything. I think you wrote the most important essay of the last 20 years when you wrote The Rise of the Unprotected. And it's not in this collection, but there are many things in
Oh,
here like
no,
the
it is
Uvalde.
in the collection.
Did you
Darling, it
change
is
the
in the
title?
collection.
Wh-
I don't think so, but it is in the collection, believe me, because
Okay, because
I
I
feel
don't have to.
tenderly towards it.
Well, I cite it to everyone as the most obviously the explanation for everything that happened. And you wrote it, I think, in February of 2016. I think you wrote it
Yes,
long before it mattered. And I've used it to explain everything to everyone who will listen. It's the unprotected. It's not the countryside versus the city. The unprotected are in the city and the countryside. They're in Washington, D.C., as well as in Warren, Ohio, and wherever Peggy Noonan grew up. It's just, it explains everything. So I'll go find it. I think you changed the title because I went looking for it and
maybe.
could not.
But you
Yeah.
know, that
So,
column was for me the culmination of 20 years of thought. And it was also, I couldn't get into it and really can't now, but the protected and the unprotected, the column about the protected who make the laws and the unprotected who have to live in them, the
yep.
protected who are upper middle and taken care of, the unprotected who are scrambling to get a foothold in America for whatever reason. Um, that was in part, that was about long dialogues I'd been having for the previous decade with my sister, who was in the unprotected class as we grew up and was in the unprotected class. And my life had changed. I'd become a well known writer. I had worked for presidents. I was protected. And just over the years, I could see the difference between my life and her life and our assumptions and observations and what frightened us had grown very different. And it was a lesson to me, and it was important to me, and it changed my life by changing my thinking.
Well, it has never not been with me since I read it. But now I've found another paragraph in the new book, A Certain Idea of America, which I'm going to use to explain Joe Biden to everyone. It's on page 223. Um, Let me tell you something, Mr. Biden says to an old friend with a clenched jaw. There's a river of power that flows through this country. Some people, most people, don't even know the river is there, but it's there. Some people know about the river, but they can't get in. They only stand at the edge. And some people, a few, get to swim in the river all the time. They get to swim their whole lives in the river of power. And that river flows from the Ivy League. Second paragraph. A lot of hungers, resentment, and future actions were embedded in that speech by Joe Biden, Syracuse Law, class of 68. They aren't the words of an unsophisticated man, but of a man who wanted things, houses, power, the glittering prizes, and who can't always be talked out of them. Boy, Peggy, bullseye on 46. Do you think,
Yeah.
have your opinion changed at all in the last year? That was written before the
Oh
last
gosh.
year.
No, it was written a few years ago. No, it's what I think. The long Biden quote is taken from Richard Ben Kramer's reporting in the book What It Takes. Um, and the observations are my own. My gosh, I think the central story really with what pushed Joe Biden was that he wanted to be a Kennedy and didn't understand why he wasn't. He was tall and handsome and had good hair and a wonderful smile, but he hadn't been born in the river of power. And he resented that and he fought scrappily. He fought with every tool he had. He used everything he had to rise and enjoy power and be the thing he thought he deserved to be, which was a famous, powerful guy who was admired.
Do you remember the exchange with Sam Alito when he made fun of Princeton, and then the next day he came in wearing a Princeton hat to prove that he wasn't anti-Ivy League? That came back to me when I read this essay on Joe Biden. It is really about envy, and it's a terrible burden. He might be right, by the way. That might be the source of the protected class, but I don't think that it is, especially in this age of
No,
technology. But for him, it was, right? For the people who grew up in the 60s.
yeah, I think so.
Peggy Noonan, you've been wonderful. A Certain Idea of America has to go back to my wife now because I took it away from her last night to do my prep. And, and I appreciate the book so much, and I appreciate your taking time to spend with me. Have a great Thanksgiving week, Peggy Noonan.
You too, to all Hewitts, and thank you very much for giving me your time, Hugh. I admire you very much.
Oh, that's mutual. Thank you, Peggy Noonan.